Hi everyone, thanks for joining me on another painting tutorial from Promethean Paints. Today we're going to focus on the tail and body of Fulgrim, the Primarch of the Emperor's Children. There's the list of the colours that we're using. We're going to start off with the airbrush and then move across to brushwork, but a bulk load of this will be with the airbrush. So I've primed the model in black, and then I've gone over that with AK Tenebrous Grey, which is a purplish grey, very dark colour. It will just give a good sort of different shadow colour than your standard black. So what I'm doing here, I'm using straight out of the pot some Vallejo white ink, but you can use any white ink straight through the airbrush. And what I'm going to be doing here is adding the white ink, small squirts from the airbrush on the areas that I want to be brightest. The airbrush will give you natural gradients. See, I'm not really doing anything much there to create the gradient. The brighter the white, the brighter your next colour is going to be. So our next colour will be a contrast paint through the airbrush, and they work really well, which would be Major's purple. But for the start, yeah, we're just going to go over the area in white, leaving natural gradients to the dark colour underneath. I'm not using an expensive airbrush. This is a cheap £30 airbrush from Amazon. I also use about a £50 compressor from Amazon as well. So my entire setup, just to prove, is less than £100. So just to prove you don't have to spend huge amounts of money on an airbrush to get really good results. So just work around the model, gently spraying the area white that you want to be white, leaving some of the dark under colour as your base, so you get nice tonal changes. Yeah, good luck. Okay, and that's your white nearly finished. And now we're just going to go through I've added some of the Majos purple into the airbrush straight from the pot, and now very gently, again little sprays from the airbrush, adding that colour all over the white and into the dark areas. So you're basically painting the entire area with the airbrush, all of that skin that you've just painted white. Nice sharp short sprays with the airbrush. Don't press down on the trigger too much, or pull back on the trigger, should I say, too much, as this will pull very quickly. So just natural sprays. If you're unsure, just do some practices on an old bit of card or an old model, but once you get the hang of it, contrast paints through the airbrush are absolutely fantastic. A great tool in the arsenal for your painting. Right, with the Majos purple now done, we can use another contrast paint, which is Doomfire Magenta. Really bright colour. I'm coming straight out with this, straight out of the airbrush, straight into the pot, as it were. You could thin this down a little bit if you wanted to, but if you've got some good control, you'll be okay. And you'll just, as you can see with where I'm aiming this into the deepest shadows, so that I'm getting a nice tonal change from the purple to the magenta to that deep black, almost purple colour. And I'm just doing this in all of the shadow areas, just to blend it in from the skin to the tail, scales and fin area. Again, short bursts with the airbrush, don't pull back too much. This adds some great colour variations to your skin, and you can add as little or as much as this as you want. Obviously don't cover too much of your purple from the Majos purple. Just add some shadows with this colour. Okay, the next colour we're going to use, we're going to add some brightness back to that skin. So we're going to thin down some very light skin tone colour. You can use whatever skin tone colour you like as long as it's bright. I'm using AK Vampiric Flesh. It's very pale, got a slight ivory hint to it. I'm using some airbrush thinner there, and this is probably 1 drop of paint to 3-4 drops of thinner, so very thin in a contrast, almost as if you were glazing this on with the airbrush. And what I'm doing is now I'm just spraying this on the areas that I want to just show as bright skin, as the skin is taut, yeah, it's showing through, so where the light would be catching it or where it's pulled across muscle. Again, not too much of this, the less is more when it comes to these highlights. You don't want to lose that amazing purplish magenta we've created. So little sprays of this across your model where you need them. I followed the box art for a guide. And that's your airbrush work done. We're now going to move across to brushwork. The first steps are going to be to highlight the model. So I've gone back to the Vampiric Flesh. What you're seeing now, I've got Vampiric Flesh on the wet palette, and in that top right hand corner I've just got some AK Magenta, which I'll do some mixing shortly. Now this is all trial and error at the moment. I had a plan here, but not much of a plan. Just going by the box art. So what I'm doing here with the thinned down Vampiric Flesh is just highlighting the raised areas, brightening them up where the skin is raised, highlighting those like you would normally highlight any arms or faces that you paint. Highlight the raised areas and try and blend them in. The white is very bright on the camera. It's not as bright actually on the model. yeah, so I wasn't as happy with some of the highlights. They were quite bright. So what I'm going to go back to now is the Major's Purple, and I'm going to put a little bit of that on the wet palette, thin it down a little bit, and just glaze this over the top of some of those highlights, just to push them back a little bit and to blend them back into the skin tone. Yeah, this is another great thing with contrast paints, is that you can thin them down and use them with glazes. They're so heavy in pigment, they carry so much colour even when thinned down, that you can use them to push back your highlights and to help blend them back across. And now to push some of the shadows up, I'm going to get some of the Tenebrous Grey and water that down, and add that into some of the shadows, and into the deepest recesses, just to enforce some shadow and some high contrast between your brightest brights and your darkest darks. I also then sort of do some outlining as well, just to again punch the contrast between the different areas. It helps define your shapes. And finally here you can just see me highlighting the raised bits of flesh where they've been caught by the grips, those little vices where the skin is pulled back. So I'm just adding little highlights to those. And then that's really your sort of the main part of the skin done. You can define those ridges a lot more on his skin. I was happy with the results here, and so we're gonna move on now to the scales, the fins. As I knock my model over, keep knocking it over here. Yeah, moving on to the scales and the fins. A lot of dry brushing here, so I've got an Artify dry brush there. You can get an entire set from Amazon for about £25. I thoroughly recommend them. They're very good dry brushes for the price. We're using some violet red, and we're now going to heavy dry brush across the scales, the fins, the lobster claw at the end of his tail. Yeah, pretty much anything here that isn't skin is going to get dry brushed this colour, and this is your sort of leaving some of that dark grey in the very, very deepest shadows. I'd say about 80-90% of these areas are going to be covered with the violet red. And now we're going to add some highlights. So we're going to be moving to the AK Magenta, and we're going to be doing another load of dry brushing. Not really washing the brush out here, it will blend in okay. So same size dry brush, and we're going to now highlight the scales. This is your sort of mid-tone colour, so you're covering now probably about 60%, 50% of the areas in this colour. A bit more gentle, as you can see, not as heavy, and this is just bringing your first highlight to the areas. Get some definition here on those shapes across the fins and the scales. As you can see with my dry brush, and just moving the model around, moving the brush around, moving it in line with the shape that you're trying to dry brush. It's not always up and down or side to side or left to right. Move it alongside the shape of the area that you're painting. And now we're really going to add some colour. The amazing AK Intense Pink. We're going to dry brush this. This is the first big highlight. This is across maybe 20% of the area on the tallest points, the most sticky out points. Very gentle, catching only those very raised areas that you want. The centre of the scales, the tips of the spines, the tips in the middle of those fins there. Again, just follow the shapes that I'm using, follow the box art for an idea. Okay, the final sort of highlight here before we move on to some fluorescent fun is I'm going just back to that vampiric flesh. I do this a couple of times, the paint's blending a bit too much there. And this is just a little bit of a base colour so that the fluorescent colour will really stand out and pop. So just the very tips of the spines here, only on the areas you really want to have the fluorescent paint on, just lightly cover with the vampiric flesh. You can use any other ivory colour or white if you want. To be very careful if you're using white. It can be quite a harsh colour, but any sort of lightish ivory, light flesh colour will be fine. And now we move on to the fun part. As you know, these are the bits I like the best. We're going to add some fluorescent to this model. We're using a fantastic colour, Green Stuff World fluorescent rose. It's a more pinkish. You can use fluorescent magenta, but I just find this rose colour is just very nice. Very nice colour. I can't really tell you what sort of colour it is. It's like a fluorescent magenta type colour. And all I'm doing now is almost edge highlighting or painting as a contrast paint all over those areas we just went over with the ivory colour. A bit of overlap there, so I'm not being overly careful, but the idea is, though, as long as you cover that pale colour you've just painted with this, it will really make the colour stand out with a little bit of overlap to help them blend together. Make sure you shake the paint pot really well. There's a ball bearing in it. If you hear that ball bearing rattle, you know it's mixed up enough. They have a tendency to clog up a little bit because there's so much pigment. But yeah, just take your time. This is pretty much the last stage. So as you can see, we're only at about 50 minutes and we've fully painted Fulgrim's tail area. So great progress. Okay, so now we're moving on to the next stage. We're going to be painting in that area there where the flesh has been torn back. We're starting off with a base coat of a sort of mid flesh tone there. You can use any mid flesh tone here, they're all not very similar. And yeah, we're just going to be base coating the flesh that's been pulled back and the muscular flesh underneath the symbol that's in the middle there, by all that muscle stuff that's under there. So yeah, just base coat with this colour. Probably take a couple of coats. This took me about 3 coats to get a good coverage, just dependent on what paint you're using. Okay, so the next part, we're going to use some contrast volupus pink, heavily watered down here. This is 1 part paint to 3, 4, 5 drops of water, so quite heavily watered down. I prefer to water this down and add multiple coats than not water it down and add too much. These take a while to. You can water it with medium, contrast medium, or with water. I've done a little mix of both, so 1 drop of water, 1 drop of medium. So I think I've gone 1 part paint, 2 parts medium, 2 parts water to thin it this way. And now we're just adding the paint on, going from the top down to the bottom, so that the colour pulls towards the bottom, where it would be sort of its most raw. And feel the flesh colour you just painted, both on that torn flesh that's been ripped off and the flesh that's the sort of muscular part in the centre. Okay, once fully dry, we're now going to just bring back some of that base colour. So go back to your base flesh paint that you used, and just go back over the areas that are raised up, just to bring back that flesh colour. So our first highlight is going to be with a good old colour, sunny skin tone. You can use any light flesh colour here, and we're going to be almost edge highlighting. I added a little bit of water here because it can be an odd colour to paint. A little bit of edge highlighting the raised areas, highlighting the veins that are there. This is your first highlight, so highlight the raised bits that you like. Add as little or much as this as you want, but not too much. You want to maintain the shaded areas, the pink areas. Of course, where the skin is pulled the tightest, I'm adding more paint there. Okay, with that done, we're moving on to the sort of next highlight. Going to be using decomposed flesh. You can use the vampiric flesh if you want. Just decomposed flesh is a bit brighter, more of a less ivory to it, more pale. And this is one of our highlights that we're doing. And this is on the very topmost raised areas, the areas where the skin is pulled tightest. Again, leaving your lesser highlights. Be very careful here, you don't want to detract too much from those base tones, from the pinkish red raw colour that you've got there. Always remember, sometimes with highlights, less is more. If you had too many highlights, they won't work because you won't have the dark areas there to really make them pop. Okay, in the final highlight, I'm just going to be using an ivory colour, which would be sort of a pallid witch flesh from GW, that sort of colour. It's very pale, not white, but as close as white as you can get. And this is just going to be over your very, very most raised areas. So this is I'm going to use where it's pulled tightest around those sort of vice areas, and across the top of the veins, and where the skin is pulled across from the flesh, from the muscle, just on those areas. But just watch along to what I'm doing here. I use the box art for a lot of the guidance. Again, I keep saying that, but the box art, GW made a fantastic job painting this model. So I'm just trying to replicate where they've put their highlights. Okay, you just saw there. I just coloured in the symbol there just to make it stand out. Just prepping for the final step on this skin, which is AK wine red, heavily watered down. It's probably 1 part paint to 5 parts water. This is a very strong colour. Again, more watering down means that you can add multiple coats and not too much at once. And I'm just painting in across, I'm painting over all of that muscle area. So where we've done all those highlights and that, if you now go over it with this colour, it will just turn the area sort of a raw, reddish, pinkish, muscular colour, make it stand out from the flesh that's been pulled away from it. And then I also add some of this to the flesh that's been ripped away, just to give it that sore kind of feel. And I do that around the veins and around where the skin is tightest, around those little vices. I actually had a little bit too much of this, and so just quickly use a dry brush that you've got and just pull some of that paint off if it pulls towards the bottom of the model, or the way is the model built. Right, we're making some good progress now. Now we're going to just move across to the gold. I wanted to add some big contrasting colours here with the gold. So I didn't want the gold to be too bright. I'm going to be doing some amazing things with his top half and his wings. So I didn't want the gold to detract from those. I wanted the eye to naturally flow upwards on this model. So we're still going to have some bright golds. So we're going to start off with the Burnt Tin by AK, which is a nice base colour to get some good contrast from a dark gold to a bright gold, almost a burnished silver towards the end. So all I'm going to do here is base coat all the areas that I want gold with the Burnt Tin, being careful around your flesh areas, being careful around anything you've just previously painted. I'm using a relatively old brush to do this, not too big, not too small, size 1 or size 2 brush on this, but just use whatever's comfortable for you. So the first highlight, I guess you would call this, is going to be with that AK Rusty Gold. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably paint about 80% of the gold areas we've just done, which is that huge area there, the little vice pins that you've got on the flesh, and the symbol in his muscular area. That's going to be about 80% of this. So edge highlighting it as well as filling in those areas you really want to be gold and stand out. Okay, now on to AK Old Gold, which oddly is very bright gold. You'd think old gold would be dark gold, but old gold is very bright. And now we are going to be edge highlighting and painting those areas that you want as the brightest. Just follow along here. I was using, again, the box art as a guide, but just those areas that would naturally catch the light when you're looking at the model. We're not going too realistic here. I want the detail to stand out, so some areas might be in shadow, but I'm going to put a highlight on those to make them stand out. Again, covering probably about 30% of the area in this colour. I did mention it actually. You could dry brush if you wanted to, using that smaller size dry brush. Same principles, the burnt tin to rusty gold to old gold. You just need to be very careful around the areas that you've painted, maybe even put in some modelling putty, airbrush putty over those areas to protect them. But yeah, you can use the dry brush here. You get a decent output with the dry brushing if you do it slowly and carefully. And now we're moving on to the final highlight, which is that Stormhole Silver from GW. And we're going to be edge highlighting and on those areas that I really want to stand out, adding quite a bit of this, actually more than I usually would. I just like the idea of it being very bright, really catching the light. So you notice sometimes with gold where it catches the light so much it almost looks silver, where the brightness bleaches out any other colour. And once we've done this stage, we are going to go a little bit crazy with the airbrush. It's an optional step, which I'll talk you through when we get there. Okay, so this next step is optional, as I mentioned. It does help pull in some of those highlights we've done. I'm using some some Green Stuff World airbrush putty, some silver, straight into the airbrush, a little bit of water in there, and as you can see with that putty, I've just covered up some of the skin so we don't get any overspray, and I am just gently, very gently pressing down the airbrush trigger, pulling back very slightly to blend that silver into the airbrush. It doesn't look very well blended there, but it's catching the light a lot, but it does in person. Really adds just some natural, just literally it's a 2-second piece of work, but just helps the gradient from gold to sort of a bright gold silver effect. Totally optional. You can dry brush that bit if you wanted to. Just be very careful around the skin area, but as you can see, that putty is off, no residue left. That was not edited footage, literally just peels off easily. And you can use the putty itself to peel off anything that gets stuck to the model, but I've never had anything damaged using that. And there we go, there's the gold work finished. So yeah, a lot of progress. Now we're going to add, for the Emperor's Children tormentors and infractors, I wanted to add a hint of purple to the gold area. So I get some Druky Violet, the shade paint, onto the wet palette, and I'm now going to sort of add that into the deepest shadows, almost using the brush like a pen and glazing it into those areas. So where you leave the brush is where the paint will be left, so always make sure you pull the brush away from the deepest shadowed area, otherwise you'll get the deepest point on the brightest, which will look odd. And this will just add a nice, very, very subtle purple hint to your gold, like it's reflecting back the gold, though I'm not going for an overly realistic feel there, but it will just give a nice purple tinge to your gold, add a bit of further life to this model. And the final step with a tenebrous grey is just to enforce some of those very dark areas again, around the little bolts that are there. I water this down with a couple of drops of water so that it flows. That's almost like a shade paint. Add little bits to the brush, and here I'm just going into those deepest shadows around the rivets, just to add some contrast from the very bright to the very dark. This is optional, but it's worth doing. It does add a nice bit of definition to some of your shapes. Don't do too much, don't cover over too many of your brightest points. Okay, now we're just going to do a little bit of leather work here. There's some weird little leather straps around his scales and fins. We're going to use two colours for this. We're going to use leather brown from AK and saddle brown from AK. We're just going to base coat the leather in the saddle brown, and then in the leather brown, and then highlight in the saddle brown. Nothing too overly complicated here. It's very straightforward. And there we go. Really, that's it. The eye of the symbol will be covered in another tutorial. We can do something special with that. And yeah, there we go. There's the finished model. That's it. That's all the stages complete for the tail area. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. There'll be some images of the model just coming up for reference. It looks fantastic with a dark background. Yeah, the next tutorial will be up in a few days for the body, for his swords, and there'll be one for the head and then one for the wings. So yeah, thanks so much for watching. Just like and subscribe and follow along for more tutorials. Feel free to contact me at any point. Happy painting.